Buildings come and buildings go, but the memories shared will stand long after the bricks are gone. Spring Mountain School was built in 1855. The school was 84 years old when it was demolished due to a new school being built. Spring Mountain built a new school in 1939. It only lasted 8 years. Gone. The first Tyndall School was built in 1875, and another school in Tyndall was built in 1916. It was closed 20 years later in 1936. Now gone. Pleasant Valley has actually had 3 buildings in 3 different locations. The first Pleasant Valley School was built in 1877. The second Pleasant Valley School was built in 1917. It closed down in 1949. Now abandoned. A new school was built in 1946. It closed 40 years later in 1986. West Carlisle School was built in 1885. In 1916, an addition to the school was built. It burned down in 1919. West Carlisle built a new school in 1919. It was closed 20 years later. It is currently the Township Hall. Keene School was built in 1888. It burned down in 1913. Keene built a new school in 1914. It is still being used today to serve our children 102 years later. It has outlived every other local school. Roscoe School was built in 1891. It closed in 1911 due to arson. A new school was built in 1912. It was demolished in 1981. While Hunding School was built in 1893. A new school was built in 1935. It was closed 14 years later in 1949. Gone. Warsaw School was built in 1893. Other additions started in 1927, then again in 1936, 1951, and the last addition was in 1957. It is still being used today to serve our children 89 years later. West Bedford School was built in 1894. Unsure when it closed, but it is now gone. Nellie School was built in 1902. It burned down in 1937. A new school was built in 1938. It was closed 27 years later in 1965, now abandoned. Conesville School was built in 1910. A new school was built in 1917. With additions built in 1930 and 1952. It is still educating children 99 years later. New Guilford School was built in 1912. It was closed 27 years later in 1939. Gone. Blissfield School was built in 1913. It was closed 27 years later in 1957. Now abandoned. Tiverton School was built in 1919. Now gone. Pike Township School was built in 1932. It closed only 7 years later in 1939. Now abandoned. Union School was built in 1939. It is still educating children 77 years later. The bricks and mortar aren't the heart of a school or its community. It's the community itself, the people and their excellence that drive the Riverview to be what it is and has always been. New buildings don't take away memories from the past. They create legacies. Let's give our children a chance to create their own legacy.
Vote for me on August 2nd.